To complete my first project, I started by scanning flowers that I found in my garden. I then scanned a painting of different colors that matched the colors of the flowers. After this, I used the technique that we learned in class to paint black strokes to get a black background. I then layered the three together in Photoshop and took out pieces of paint to reveal the flowers. I did this so at first glance it was somewhat hard to see what was behind the paint, so the viewer had to take the time to look at the picture. If I would redo this assignment, I would try to bring in different colors of flowers to scan and add them to the final picture. Our second assignment was to show depth of field in our image. I looked through my room to try and find objects that had a lot of detail in them. I wanted to photograph objects that had detail in them so that the part that was in focus would draw the viewer's eye in. To achieve the depth of field, I had to manipulate the shutter speed and aperture. For my final image that I chose, I had to position my camera on my vanity to get the angle that I wanted. I also increased the contrast and clarity in Photoshop so that the colors would pop. For my motion blur image, I had to change the shutter speed to a lower one so that the motion would be blurred. I decided to photograph the movement in my friend's hair because I thought it would be interesting. I had her whip her hair in different directions while I shot the pictures. I had to change the lighting in Camera Raw because the image was taken directly by the windows, so there was too much light in the photo. In Photoshop, I increased the vibrance to bring out the yellow background and the colors of her shirt. In the future, to further my work, I would have had the subject wear a better variety of clothing. To show low-key lighting, I photographed my mom holding different objects in front of a candle to obscure the light. As you can see, my images are blurry because at the time we were unable to check out tripods. To improvise, I used a chair to set my camera on, which left the image with a better quality. While taking the picture, because there wasn't a lot of light coming in, I had to have a slow shutter speed so enough light would come into the camera. I had the most trouble with this assignment, and if I were to do it again, I would make sure to have a tripod. In my final image, I had my mom look away from the camera for a dramatic effect. To photograph my texture images, I went in my backyard and found objects that had unique textures. I made sure to fully focus my camera so that I could get all the details in the textures. I found that different types of rock showed an interesting type of texture in the image. To complete this assignment, I then had to take pictures of landscapes. While doing this, I made sure to keep the rule of thirds in mind while taking all of my images. I went to the pond in my neighborhood and shot photos of the landscapes. Then I used Photoshop to complete a texture overlay on the landscape. I decided to increase the saturation and vibrance of the landscape image to make sure that the colors were seen when the texture was layered over it. I set the opacity of the textures at about 30% so it was visible but didn't distract from the landscape image. The next assignment was to make a panorama. To do this, I had to photograph 5 to 6 images at a soccer game. When photographing this, I had to keep my camera at the same level so the pictures would be even when I uploaded them. This took me a few tries to do. I wanted to take pictures at a soccer game to show all the different things going on. You get to see the soccer players, the cheerleaders, and the fans. I thought this brought a lot of diversity to the image and gave the viewer more to look at. When I uploaded my images into Photoshop, I had some trouble deciding which type of panorama to make my picture, and it took me a few tries to get it right. I believe that some of my strengths in my final image was the way the panorama was put together. There is one spot that isn't perfectly symmetrical to the rest of the image, but besides that, I think it turned out well. I also enjoyed the different shadows coming off from the buildings. For my contrast image, I took a bowl of fruit in my house and arranged them to be mixed in with oranges and apples. I then placed the bowl on a light-colored blanket to show the contrast between the bright colors of the fruit and the plain colored background. The lighting coming into my house that day worked very well for the photographs, so when I brought the image into Bridge, I didn't have to change the contrast or the amount of shadows at all. I increased the vibrance once again to better the image and the contrast shown. For my free choice image, I spent a while looking at Scholastics for ideas. I started off taking pictures of my cat because I didn't know what else to photograph. On Scholastics, I saw a lot of images that were taken of only one part of the body. I was intrigued by this, so I thought I would do this for my free choice project. I had my friend do different things with her tongue and photographed her against a plain white wall. I chose this friend because she had dimples and I was going to be taking pictures of just the bottom of her face, so I wanted there to be something different that would help with the creativity. I then uploaded all my images to Photoshop and put a black and white filter on them. After this, I zoomed in on her lips and painted them a bright color to contrast against the black and white. I repeated this to 4 similar images and then put them in line all together.